Elderly man finds fake grass amid drought, and what he discovers underneath. Harold Mitchell never imagined that patch of green grass in the middle of his parched backyard would change his life forever. The drought that had plagued the region for months had turned his small property in Springfield into an expanse of cracked, yellowed earth. It was during another desperate attempt to save what remained of the garden that he noticed something strange. While all the surrounding vegetation had completely dried up, a small area remained green, almost artificial. Dorothy watched from the porch, hand on her forehead, as her husband approached that suspicious patch. "Harold, leave it alone and come have lunch," she shouted, but there was a nervous tone in her voice that he couldn't quite place. The 70-year-old man, his blue shirt already soaked with sweat, ignored his wife's call. Something about that artificial green bothered him deeply. With trembling hands, he bent down and touched the grass. It was fake, completely artificial. "What the heck is this?" he murmured, looking over his shoulder at Dorothy, who had come down from the porch and was slowly approaching. "Come back inside, Harold. The sun is too strong," she insisted, but he was already pulling up the artificial grass with both hands. Underneath the fake grass was a wooden structure, like a small lid buried in the ground. Harold's heart raced. In their 45 years of marriage, he had never seen that there. The property was small. He knew every corner, every tree, every stone. "Dorothy, come see this," he called, but when he turned around, she was already very close, her face pale and eyes wide. "Don't touch that, Harold. Please." Her voice came out as a desperate whisper, but it was too late. He had already lifted the wooden lid, revealing a hole about 1/2 meter deep. Inside, wrapped in thick plastic, was a rusty metal box. Harold looked at his wife, searching for answers in her face. Dorothy stood motionless, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Her eyes were fixed on the box. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, but she only shook her head. No, unable to speak. Carefully, Harold lifted the box out of the hole. It was heavier than he expected. The rust indicated it had been there a long time, probably decades. He looked around, checking if anyone else could see them, but the property was isolated, surrounded only by empty lots. "Let's open it inside," he said, getting up with difficulty. Dorothy followed him in silence, walking as if in a trance. Inside the small 3-bedroom house they had built in the early years of their marriage, Harold placed the box on the kitchen table. "Is there a key?" he asked, examining the rusty lock. "Break it," Dorothy said softly, surprising him with the quick reply. Harold got a hammer from the garage and, with 2 sure strikes, broke the lock. The sound of shattering metal echoed through the silent kitchen. He opened the lid of the box slowly, not knowing what to expect. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing, what Harold found inside the box left him speechless. Photographs. Dozens of photographs of Dorothy with another man. They weren't old photos from her youth. They were photos from when she was already married to him. He recognized the light blue dress in one of the photos. She had worn that dress for their 5th wedding anniversary. Beneath the photos were love letters, handwritten in a masculine handwriting he recognized immediately. It was from William Patterson, his best friend, best man at their wedding, godfather to his children. "Dorothy." His voice came out hoarse, laden with a pain he had never felt before. She collapsed into the chair by the table and began to cry. It wasn't a delicate cry. It was a deep, desperate sob, as if 40 years of guilt had exploded at once. "I can explain," she managed to say between sobs. "Explain what?" Harold picked up one of the letters and began to read. The date on the letterhead was 1982, just 3 years after their marriage. "My dearest Dorothy, I can no longer pretend we are just friends when we are around Harold. Every time he speaks about you with that sparkle in his eyes, my heart breaks. I must see you tomorrow at the usual place. I can no longer live without you." Harold's hands trembled as he read. William Patterson had signed the letter as "Your Eternal Love, W.P." "How long did this go on?" he asked, his voice calmer than he expected. 2 years, Dorothy answered softly. from 1981 to 1983. Harold quickly did the math. It was exactly the period when William had moved to the same city as them, the period when he came to dinner at their house every Friday, the period when Dorothy always cleaned the house, especially on Fridays. "Do the children know?" he asked, referring to their kids, Thomas and Rebecca, who were little at the time. "No," she shook her head vigorously. "No one ever knew, only the three of us." Harold continued sifting through the box. Besides the photos and letters, there was an engagement ring he had never seen. It was delicate, with a small diamond, very different from the simple band he had given Dorothy. "Did he ask you to marry him?" The question came out more like a painful realization. Dorothy nodded, unable to look her husband in the eyes. "He wanted me to leave everything and run away with him to Philadelphia." "And why didn't you go?" Harold was surprised by his own question. Part of him wanted to know if she had chosen to stay out of love or convenience. "Because I loved you," she answered, finally raising her eyes to meet his. "Because I love you, Harold. What I felt for William was..." It was a momentary madness, a fantasy of a young woman who felt neglected. "Neglected?" he repeated, feeling a new wave of pain. "I worked 16 hours a day to build this life for us. How was that neglect?" "You worked so much that sometimes days would go by without us having a real conversation. William appeared at the right time, saying the right things, making me feel special again." Harold looked around the kitchen they had remodeled together 3 times over the years. Every tile, every piece of furniture had been chosen by 4 hands. How could she have kept this secret for so long? "Where did you meet?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "At his mother's house, when she traveled to visit his sister. Sometimes downtown when you were working." Harold remembered all the times Dorothy said she was going downtown shopping and came back hours later without any bags. At the time, he joked that she just went for walks. He never suspected there was another reason. "What ended it?" he continued, probing, as if understanding the details could lessen the pain. "William started getting very possessive. He wanted me to divorce you, to take the children. When I said I would never do that, he threatened to tell you everything. And then I ended it. I told him that if he told you anything, I would deny everything and never speak to him again. I buried these things and swore I would never think about it again." Harold picked up one of the photographs. In it, Dorothy smiled in a way he hadn't seen in years. There was a lightness in her face, youth, pure joy. It hurt to admit, but she looked happy in that photo. "When did you bury this?" he asked. "In 1984, after William died in the accident." Harold remembered perfectly the day William Patterson had crashed his car into a tree on the road that connected the town to the countryside. Everyone said he was driving too fast, that maybe he had been drinking. At the time, Harold had wept for the loss of his best friend. Now, a new possibility began to form in his mind. "Dorothy, look me in the eyes and answer me one thing," he said, his voice more serious than ever. "William's accident, was it really an accident?" Dorothy's eyes widened. "What do you mean by that?" "You broke up with him. He threatened to tell everything. You said you'd deny it all. A week later, he ends up smashed into a tree. Doesn't that seem strange to you?" "Harold, are you implying that—" "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking if you know something you haven't told me." Dorothy stood up abruptly from the chair, knocking over a glass of water on the table. "How can you think such a thing? William had an accident. An accident!" But there was something defensive in her tone that didn't completely convince Harold. He decided not to press the matter for now, but a seed of suspicion had been planted. The sound of the front door opening interrupted the tense conversation. It was Rebecca, the eldest daughter, who worked as a teacher in the capital and visited her parents once a month. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad," she called from the hallway. "Why didn't you answer the phone? I called 3 times. Harold and Dorothy exchanged glances. Neither of them had heard the phone ring. Quickly, he closed the box and pushed it under the table. "We were in the backyard," Dorothy replied, trying to hide her face, swollen from crying. Rebecca entered the kitchen and immediately sensed something was wrong. "Did you two have a fight? Mom looks like she's been crying." "It's nothing, honey." Harold tried to downplay it. Your mother got upset because the drought killed the plants in the garden. Dad, for goodness sake, they're just plants, Rebecca said, hugging her mother. We'll buy more when it rains again. Dorothy returned her daughter's hug with an intensity that caught Harold's attention. It was as if she were clinging to Rebecca to keep from drowning. I brought some things from the city, Rebecca said, placing 2 bags on the table. I bought those cookies Dad likes and the shampoo Mom uses. Thank you, honey, Harold said, but his mind was far from the gifts. He was thinking about how he was going to manage to talk to Dorothy about all of this with Rebecca at home. I'm staying until Sunday, Rebecca announced. I need a few days away from the city rush. And you too? How are you? Is everything okay with your health? Everything's great, Dorothy replied too quickly, again drawing her daughter's attention. Rebecca looked from one to the other, clearly sensing the tension in the air. Are you sure everything's okay? Can I help with anything? Of course not, honey, Harold forced a smile. What help? We're fine. Just worried about this drought, that's all. For the rest of the afternoon, Harold could barely concentrate on the conversation. Rebecca talked about work, about her students, about life in the city, but he could only think about the photographs under the table. Every time he looked at Dorothy, he saw a strange stranger. How had she managed to keep that secret for 40 years? How could she sleep beside him every night knowing what she had done? How could she smile when people spoke well of William Patterson, calling him a good man? At dinner, Rebecca noticed her parents had barely touched their food. Guys, did you eat something spoiled? She asked. You look terrible. It's just the heat, Dorothy said. This drought is wearing everyone out. Speaking of which, Rebecca continued, Thomas called yesterday, said he's bringing the family next weekend. The grandkids are excited to see their grandparents. The mention of their youngest son seemed to cheer Dorothy up a bit. That's good. It's been a while since they visited. Yeah, Harold agreed mechanically. It'll be good to see the kids. But inside, he was wondering if he could pretend everything was normal in front of his grandchildren, knowing what he now knew about their grandmother. How could he watch Dorothy play with the children, being the loving grandma, knowing she had betrayed the whole family? That night, Rebecca slept in the guest room, and Harold lay next to Dorothy, both pretending to sleep. He could hear her uneven breathing, knew she was awake too. Around 2 in the morning, she whispered, Harold, are you awake? I am, he answered softly. We need to talk more about this. I know. Will you forgive me? This question hung in the air for long minutes. Harold didn't know the answer. How to forgive 40 years of lies? How to forgive the betrayal with his best friend? How to forgive the fact she had kept physical mementos of that relationship? I don't know, he answered honestly. I need time. How much time? I don't know, maybe a long time. The next day, Rebecca decided to help her father in the garden. They were trying to save some plants when she commented, Dad, what's that hole over there in the middle of the yard? Harold swallowed hard. He had forgotten to cover the hole where the box was buried. Oh, that... He tried to sound casual. I was looking for a leak in the pipes. Did you find it? It was nothing, he answered, grabbing a shovel to cover the hole quickly. Just a false alarm. As he threw dirt into the hole, Harold thought about how symbolic that act was. He was literally burying the truth again, but this time not by choice. Dad, can I ask you something? Rebecca said, after working in silence for a while. Of course. You and Mom are really okay. Yesterday you both seemed really off. Harold stopped digging and looked at his daughter. Rebecca was 38, a grown woman, intelligent, observant. Maybe she could help in some way. Rebecca, do you remember your godfather, William? Of course, Dad. Uncle William. Why? How do you remember him? What do you mean? What kind of person he was in your childhood memory? Rebecca thought for a moment. He was affectionate, fun. He always brought presents for me and Thomas. Why are you asking this? No reason, honey. Just feeling nostalgic. He was really in love with Mom, wasn't he? Rebecca said casually, but the phrase hit Harold like a punch in the stomach. What did you mean by that? Oh, Dad, any kid could see it. The way he looked at Mom, how he always praised her cooking, how he made up any excuse to be near her. Thomas and I even joked that Uncle William was in love with Mom. Harold felt the world spin around him. If even the children noticed, how had he been so blind? And your mother, how did she react? Mom always got embarrassed, kind of flushed. But I thought it was because she's shy, right? Yeah, shy, Harold repeated. But now he knew it wasn't shyness, it was guilt. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. That afternoon, while Rebecca had gone out to visit old friends in town, Harold confronted Dorothy again. The children knew, he said directly. What do you mean they knew? She asked, but her face was already pale. Rebecca told me that even she and Thomas joked about William having a crush on you. If the children noticed, who else knew? Dorothy sat down heavily on the living room sofa. Harold, you have to understand that I never meant to hurt anyone. But you did. You deceived me for 40 years. And now I find out that my own children noticed things I couldn't see. You were a good husband, a good father. You trusted people. That was a quality of yours, not a flaw. Was it? He asked bitterly. Because now I can't even trust my own wife. The silence stretched between them. Dorothy nervously played with her wedding ring, spinning it on her finger. It was a habit she'd had for decades, but now Harold wondered if she always did it when she remembered the affair. Dorothy, I need to know everything. I can't stand finding out things piece by piece anymore. Everything what? I've already told you everything. You haven't. Where else did you meet? How many people knew? How much money did you spend on him? What other things did you hide from me? Each question was like a stab, but he needed to know. He needed to understand the extent of the betrayal. We also met at Mrs. Martha's house when she went to her daughter's, and a few times. She hesitated. Where? Here at home, when you travelled for work. This revelation was the worst of all. Harold abruptly stood up from the sofa. In my house? In my bed? Not in our bed, never in our bed, she said quickly. In the guest room, only twice. Only twice, he repeated, incredulous, as if that made a difference. It does make a difference, Harold. Our bed was always sacred to me, always. But my house wasn't. My trust wasn't. My friendship with William wasn't. Dorothy began to cry again, but this time Harold felt no desire to console her. He felt anger, disappointment, a deep pain that seemed to grow with every minute. What else did you spend on him? He continued, interrogating. Nothing important. Sometimes I bought a shirt, a tie. I made a special cake on Fridays when he came for dinner. And I thought you were being especially affectionate with me on Fridays, he said ironically. Harold, please, I was trying to make up for it. Every time I did something for William, I tried to do something special for you too. Trying to buy my ignorance with extra affection. It wasn't like that, it was guilt. I felt awful after every meeting with him. I tried to be a better wife to you. Harold walked to the window and looked out at the backyard where he had found the box. The artificial grass was still in a corner, like physical evidence of a lie that lasted decades. Why did you put the fake grass over it? He asked. About 5 years ago, when the neighbors started renovating their houses, I got scared that someone might find that. I bought the artificial grass and glued it over the top. And you thought no one would notice a patch of green grass in the middle of the drought? I didn't think the drought would last so long. I thought when it rained, the grass would grow around it and disguise it. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Harold. It was exactly her attempt to hide it that ended up revealing everything. How many people knew? He asked once more. No one knew for sure. Some people might have suspected, but no one ever said anything to me. How did William die, Dorothy? What do you mean how he died? You know how, car accident. But the circumstances, were you with him that week? No. I had ended everything with him 2 months before, and he was okay with that. Dorothy took a long time to answer. No, he wasn't okay. He called me every day, showed up here at the house when you weren't home, said he would tell you everything if I didn't go back to him. And then? So, I told him that if he did that, I would tell everyone he was making up stories because I had rejected him. And you think he killed himself because of that? I don't know. Maybe. He was very upset the last time we talked." Harold felt an enormous weight in his chest. If William had really taken his own life because of Dorothy's rejection, then he hadn't just lost his wife to his best friend. He had lost his best friend because of his wife. "Dorothy, do you have any idea what that meant? If he really killed himself, you are responsible for a man's life." "Don't say that," she shouted, getting up from the sofa. "Don't put that blame on me. William was an adult. He made his choices." "What choices? He fell in love with his best friend's wife, was reciprocated for 2 years, and when he was definitively rejected, he couldn't handle it. Where are his choices in this story? He chose to pursue me. He chose to threaten to tell you everything. He chose not to take no for an answer." Harold realized he was seeing a version of Dorothy he had never seen before. There was a hardness in her, a coldness that frightened him. Had she always been like this, or had the guilt of the years turned her into someone different? The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted the argument. It was Rebecca returning from her visits. "We'll continue this later," Harold whispered quickly. "Hi, guys." Rebecca entered the house with a smile on her face. "I ran into Carol downtown. Do you remember her?" "Carol?" Dorothy asked, trying to disguise that she had been crying. "You're Anthony's daughter who lived in the blue house. She said something interesting." Harold and Dorothy exchanged worried looks. "What did she say?" Harold asked, trying to sound casual. "She said she always thought Godfather William was in love with her mother. Said her mother always commented on it." The silence in the room grew heavy. Rebecca looked from one parent to the other, clearly realizing she had said something that bothered them. "Guys, did I say something wrong?" she asked. "No, honey," Dorothy replied quickly. "It's just that talking about those who are gone always makes us melancholy." "That's true," Rebecca agreed. "But Carol said something that made me curious. She said her mother always thought the way Uncle William died was strange." Harold felt his heart race. "Strange how?" "She said he was very sad in the last few weeks, that he had lost weight, that he spoke little. Her mother thought he had some serious problem." "Everyone has problems," Dorothy said defensively. "Yeah, but she said that the day before the accident, he showed up at their house asking for her parents. Said he wanted to say something important, but when Carol said they weren't there, he left. She thought it was strange because he seemed desperate." Harold looked at Dorothy, who was visibly disturbed by the information. "It was probably some work problem," he said, trying to end the subject. "Could be," Rebecca agreed. "I just found it curious she remembered such a specific thing after so many years." That night, after Rebecca went to sleep, Harold and Dorothy stayed in the kitchen talking in whispers. "Did you hear what Rebecca said?" he asked. "I heard. William wanted to tell someone. He probably wanted to tell about the two of you." "Could be. And when he didn't find anyone to confide in, he went home and—" "Stop it, Harold, we don't know what happened." "You're right, we don't know, but you know more than you're telling me." Dorothy sighed deeply. "Harold, I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone, but you have to promise you won't judge. I've been judging for 2 days. Talk." The day before William died, he called me in the afternoon. He said he couldn't keep it to himself any longer, that he was going to tell you everything. I told him if he did that, I would deny it all and make you believe he was making it up. And he said it didn't matter, that he'd rather lose your friendship than keep living with that guilt. He said you deserved to know the truth. Harold fell silent, processing the information. "After that, he said something that haunts me to this day," Dorothy continued. "He said, 'Dorothy, I don't know how I'll be able to look in the mirror the day after tomorrow, but at least I'll be able to sleep at night.' And what did you say?" "I said he was a coward, that he was destroying everyone's lives over a passion that had already passed. I said he was a weak man and that I regretted ever getting involved with him." "Dorothy, I know. Those were the last words I ever said to him. And the next day, he crashed his car into that tree." They were silent for long minutes. Harold was beginning to understand that the situation was much more complex than he had initially imagined. "Do you think he did it on purpose?" he finally asked. "I've spent 40 years trying not to think about that. But you do think about it. every day. And what's your conclusion? That I contributed to a man's life ending, and that if I tell this to anyone, more lives will end too. Harold understood that Dorothy hadn't kept the secret just to protect the marriage. She had kept it to protect William's memory, to protect her own sanity, to protect the whole family from a truth that could destroy much more than a marriage. "Why did you bury the things in the backyard instead of burning them?" he asked. Because they were the only proof that it really happened. I'm a person who needs concrete proof to believe things. If I burned everything over time, I might start to believe I had made it all up. So you wanted to preserve the memory. I wanted to preserve the guilt. I thought I deserved to carry that as punishment. This revelation completely changed Harold's perspective on the situation. Dorothy hadn't buried the objects to hide a love affair. She had buried them to preserve a guilt she felt she deserved to carry forever. "And why did you put the artificial grass over it 5 years ago?" "Because I started having nightmares. I dreamed that you found everything, that the grandchildren found it, that the whole neighborhood found out. I decided 40 years of guilt was enough. But fate wanted me to find it anyway. Fate or God or whatever. Maybe it's time for the truth to come out after all." "And what do you want me to do with this truth?" "I don't know. I just know I can't carry this alone anymore." Harold looked at the woman with whom he had shared almost half a century of life. She was visibly thinner, with deeper wrinkles, whiter hair. The weight of keeping that secret had taken its physical toll. "Dorothy, I need time to process all this." "How much time?" "I don't know. Maybe a lot. And in the meantime, we pretend everything's normal for the kids." "For now, yes." "And for me? Can you still feel anything for me?" This was the question Harold feared most. Looking at Dorothy at that moment, he felt a confusing mix of love, anger, compassion, disgust, understanding, and distrust. "I feel many things for you," he answered honestly. "I just don't know yet which of those things are stronger." On Sunday, Rebecca returned to the city without suspecting a thing. She said goodbye to her parents with affectionate kisses and promises to return soon. "Take care of yourselves," she said at the door. "And Dad, stop worrying so much about that garden. It's just a drought. It'll pass." After she left, Harold and Dorothy were alone again with the weight of the truth between them. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. That week, Harold could barely work. He had a small auto repair shop in town, but he couldn't concentrate on anything. Every customer who came in, every casual conversation, every forced smile felt like a lie. On Wednesday, he decided to visit Mrs. Eleanor, William Patterson's mother. She lived in a nursing home about 20 kilometers from town. She was an 85-year-old lady who still had a good memory and received few visitors. "Harold," she exclaimed when she saw him at the door of her room, "what a wonderful surprise. It's been a while since you've come by." "That's right, Mrs. Eleanor. I've been very busy, but I couldn't not come see you." "How is Dorothy and the children?" "Everyone's fine. Rebecca works as a teacher in the capital. Thomas got married. He has 2 children." "That's good. Time has flown by, hasn't it?" They chatted about trivial things for a few minutes, before Harold gathered the courage to bring up the subject that had really brought him there. "Mrs. Eleanor, can I ask you a question about William?" The lady's face immediately grew sad. "Of course, my dear. What do you want to know?" "Do you think he was having some kind of problem before the accident?" Mrs. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, as if deciding what to say. "Why do you want to know this, Harold?" "I don't know. Sometimes I think about him. I miss him. I keep wondering if I could have helped in some way. You were a good friend to my William, the best friend he ever had." The word best echoed painfully in Harold's mind. "But he was different, really," Mrs. Eleanor continued. "In the last few weeks before the accident, he barely ate, barely slept. He lost a lot of weight. Do you know why? I thought it was work. He was having difficulties at the company. But now, looking back, I think it was something else." "What kind of thing?" "A heart problem. Not health-wise, a feeling problem." Harold's stomach tightened. "Why do you think that?" Because once I caught him crying in his room. When I asked what was wrong, he said he had done a very bad thing to a very important person. Said he couldn't forgive himself anymore. Did he say who the person was? No, but I always suspected it had something to do with a woman. Why? Because in the last few months he talked a lot about marriage, family, regret. And there was a photo he kept in his wallet of a woman, but he never wanted to show it to me properly. Harold felt the world spin. A photo. Yes. Once I asked if she was his girlfriend, and he said she was a woman he loved very much, but could never have. And you think that my son was consumed by love for a married woman, and that when he realized he would never be able to be with her, he chose to leave for good. Mrs. Eleanor began to cry softly. Harold felt terrible for reopening that wound, but he needed to know more. Mrs. Eleanor, I'm sorry to ask this, but did William ever say anything about telling the truth to someone? What do you mean? About this impossible love. Did he talk about telling the important person he had hurt? Oh, yes. On the last Sunday before the accident, he said he was going to do the right thing for the first time in years, said he was going to tell the whole truth, even if it cost him the most important friendship of his life. Harold felt a physical pain in his chest. William was referring to him. William was going to tell about the affair with Dorothy, even knowing it would destroy the friendship between them. And do you think he would have had the courage? Knowing my son, I think so. When he decided to do something, he didn't change his mind. And what happened? I never knew. On Monday, he left home in the morning saying he was going to resolve everything. In the afternoon, we received news of the accident. Harold said goodbye to Mrs. Eleanor with a heavy heart. Now he was certain that William had truly decided to tell everything. The question was, what had happened to make him change his mind and end up against that tree? On his way home, he stopped at the cemetery to visit William's grave. It was a simple burial plot, with a marble cross and the inscription, William Patterson Mitchell, 1951-1984, beloved friend, cherished son. Looking at that headstone, Harold felt a confusing mix of emotions. Anger at having been betrayed, sadness for the loss of his friend, guilt for not having noticed his suffering, and a question that tormented him. Had William really taken his own life? When he got home, he found Dorothy tending to the plants in the backyard. She had bought new seedlings and was trying to replant them in the spot where the box was buried. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Trying to make something grow again," she replied without looking up. "Dorothy, I went to visit Mrs. Eleanor today." She stopped working the soil and looked at him, frightened. "Why?" "To better understand what happened to William." "And what did you find out?" "That he really was going to tell everything, that he was determined to do the right thing. I already told you that. But you didn't tell me that he changed his mind after talking to you." Dorothy stood up and wiped her hands on her apron. "Harold, what do you want from me? I want to know exactly what you said to him in that last phone call. I already told you. I said he was a coward, that he was a weak man. What else?" "What else what?" "Dorothy, William left home on Monday, determined to tell me everything. Something happened during the day that made him give up and crash his car into that tree. What was it?" Dorothy began pacing back and forth, visibly agitated. "How should I know? I wasn't with him." "But you might have spoken to him." "I did." "When?" "He called me in the morning before he left home." "And what did he say?" "He said he was going to talk to you that same day, that he couldn't keep the secret any longer." "And you?" "And I said that if he did that, I would tell everyone that he had tried to harass me and that I had always rejected him." Harold fell silent, processing the information. "You threatened to destroy his reputation," he said finally. "I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do." "And it worked. He gave up on telling me." "Yes. And he preferred to die rather than live with the guilt and also be seen as a harasser." "Harold, stop. You're making me feel worse than I already do. How should you feel? You practically killed a man to protect your secret." "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. You chose your reputation over his life. Dorothy broke down in tears again. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I've spent 40 years without thinking about it every single day? I don't know, Dorothy. I don't know anything about you anymore. That night, they slept in separate rooms for the first time in 4 decades of marriage. Harold stayed in the guest room, the same room where Dorothy had received William during the affair. Lying in that bed, he tried to imagine how his wife had managed to go on living normally after all that, how she could smile, make jokes, receive visitors, go to church, raise their children, all while carrying the weight of a betrayal and possibly a tragedy. The next morning, Thomas called to say he would visit them over the weekend with his family. Harold and Dorothy had to feign enthusiasm at the news, but both were terrified at the idea of having to pretend everything was normal in front of their children and grandchildren. We need to resolve this before they get here, Harold said. Resolve it how? You can't solve 40 years of secrets in 3 days. Then we'll have to pretend everything's fine. Can you do that? Harold looked at Dorothy. Despite all the anger and disappointment, there was still something in her that moved him. Maybe it was the weight of the years together, the shared experiences, the difficulties overcome side by side. For now I can. For the grandchildren. And after, when they leave? I don't know. We'll have to figure it out. On Friday afternoon, Thomas arrived with his wife Jennifer and their 2 children, Nathan, 8 years old, and Emily, 6. The house filled with joy and noise, forcing Harold and Dorothy to put on masks of happiness. Grandpa! Grandma! The children shouted, running to hug their grandparents. Hi, kiddos, Harold said, picking Nathan up. For a moment, the innocent presence of the children made him forget all the problems. Did you bring the rain? Dorothy asked playfully. Because here there's only drought. We brought something better, Emily said, pulling a drawing from her backpack. I drew a picture of the whole family. It was a typical child's drawing. Stick figures representing all the family members, with a big heart in the middle, and the phrase, I love you, written in colored crayon. How beautiful, sweetie, Dorothy said, but her voice trembled slightly. Are you crying, Grandma? Nathan asked, worried. I'm moved by the beautiful drawing, she replied, hugging her grandson. During dinner, Thomas and Jennifer talked about work, plans for the future, the children's mischief. It was a normal family conversation, but Harold could barely concentrate. Dad, you're quiet today, Thomas observed. Everything okay? I'm great, son. Just tired from the week. And this drought, huh? I've never seen anything like it. Yeah, it's ruining everything. At least you don't depend on farming, Jennifer said. I imagine how hard it must be for the small producers. That's true, Dorothy agreed. Mr. Anthony, the neighbor, lost his entire corn crop. The conversation continued about everyday matters, but Harold noticed Dorothy was making a huge effort to seem normal. She smiled a lot, talked a lot, asked the children too many questions. Grandma, you're different, Emily observed with the typical sincerity of children. Different how, sweetie? I don't know. More, what's it called again, Mom? What, honey? Jennifer asked. When a person gets kind of weird, kind of nervous. Agitated, Jennifer suggested. That's it. Grandma is agitated. Dorothy laughed forcedly. It's the excitement of having you here. I always get like this when you come. But you've never been like this before, Nathan observed, showing that children are much more perceptive than adults imagine. It's because you're growing up and I get more emotional, she improvised. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Harold went out to the backyard. The sky was clear, full of stars, and the silence of the country night was almost absolute. Dorothy appeared at the kitchen door. Can't sleep? No. Can I stay here with you? You can. They sat on the wooden bench Harold had built years ago under the mango tree that no longer bore fruit because of the drought. They're beautiful, Dorothy said, referring to the grandchildren. They are. And smart. They notice everything. Like you and I should have noticed many things we didn't. Harold, do you really want to keep dwelling on this? I don't know if I want to, but I can't stop. And what would it take for you to be able to stop? It was a difficult question. What would he need to be able to forgive and move on? More information? More time? Or simply accept that some wounds never heal completely? "I think I need to understand why you did it," he finally said. "What do you mean, why? What was missing in our marriage that you had to look for elsewhere?" Dorothy stayed quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was low and reflective. "You know what scared me the most back then? It wasn't the possibility of you finding out. It was the possibility of me actually falling in love with William and destroying everything we had built." "And did you fall in love?" "For a while I thought so. But then I realized it wasn't love. It was neediness, curiosity, vanity. Vanity. Having a man courting me, making me feel special, different. You were always very practical, Harold. Married me, built the house, had the children, worked hard. It was all very certain, very predictable. And that was bad? It wasn't bad. It was too safe. Sometimes I felt I had just become a function in your life, the wife, the mother of your children, the lady of the house. But you were special to me. I was, but you never showed it. You never surprised me, never courted me anymore." Harold reflected on this. It was true that after the first years of marriage, he had settled into the routine. He thought showing love was working hard and providing for the family. "And did William show it?" "Too much. He brought flowers, wrote little notes, talked about feelings all the time. He made me feel like a desired woman, not just a wife fulfilling duties." "So it was my fault." "It was nobody's fault, Harold. It was a situation that got out of hand. It started as a friendship, turned into an attraction, then turned into a serious involvement." "And when did you realize it had become too serious?" "When William started talking about marriage, when he said he wanted me to leave you and run away with him. That's when I realized the magnitude of the mistake I was making." "And why didn't you end it right then?" "Because I was torn. There was a part of me that wanted to go, that was tired of the routine, the predictability. But there was a bigger part that couldn't imagine life without you, without the children, without everything we had built." "And which part won?" "The part that truly loved you. Not the passionate, desperate love I felt for William, but the solid, lasting love that you build over time." Harold absorbed these words. On one hand, they relieved him, showing that Dorothy had chosen to stay out of love. On the other hand, it hurt to know he had grown so complacent in the marriage that he had pushed his wife into another man's arms. "Dorothy, if I had been more attentive, more affectionate, would none of this have happened? I don't know, Harold. Maybe not. Or maybe I would have found another reason to make a mistake. Sometimes people do wrong things not because of what's missing, but because of what's in excess." "How so?" "There was too much free time, too much curiosity, too much emotional neediness I didn't know how to handle. William appeared at the right time and place to take advantage of all that." They fell silent again, each lost in their thoughts. In the distance, they heard the sound of a car passing on the dirt road, raising a cloud of dry dust. "Harold, can I ask you something?" Dorothy finally said. "You can. Do you still feel anything for me? Love, affection, anything?" It was the question he feared most, because it didn't have a simple answer. Looking at Dorothy at that moment, sitting beside him after 45 years, he felt many things simultaneously. "I do feel," he answered honestly. "I feel many things. Love, anger, disappointment, longing for the woman I thought you were, curiosity about the woman you really are." "Longing for the woman you thought I was?" "Yes. For 40 years I was married to an edited version of you. Now I'm getting to know the complete version, and I don't yet know if I like what I see." "What don't you like?" "From your ability to keep secrets, to lie, to manipulate situations, from the coldness you showed William at the end." "And what do you like?" Harold thought for a moment. "I like your courage in carrying such a heavy burden alone for so long. I like knowing that you chose to stay with me even when you had another option. I like seeing that you were always more complex than I imagined. Complex is a polite way of saying complicated. Perhaps, but I prefer a complicated and real woman to a simple and false one." "So you think our whole life was false?" "Not all of it, but some pieces, yes. Which pieces? Every time you smiled when you were thinking of him. Every time you were affectionate with me to compensate for something. Every Friday when you made special dinners. Harold, I need you to understand something. I was never affectionate with you out of obligation or guilt. Even during the worst moments of the affair with William, I kept loving you. How? How could you love two men at the same time? Because they were different kinds of love. With you, it was the love of a companion, a life partner. With William, it was passion, fantasy, an escape from reality. And which of the two was stronger? Yours. Always yours. If it weren't, I wouldn't have ended it with William. But you only ended it when he forced you to choose. That's true, I was too cowardly to make the decision on my own. And if he hadn't forced you, I think the affair would have ended naturally. Passions like that don't last forever. But it lasted 2 years. It lasted because we saw each other rarely. Everything was so intense precisely because it was scarce. Harold tried to process all this information. Part of him wanted to understand every detail, as if that could lessen the pain. Another part wanted to stop stirring up the past and try to move forward. Dorothy, what do you want to happen now? I want you to forgive me. I want us to find a way to move forward together. And if I can't forgive you, then you tell me that and we each go our separate ways. At almost 70 years old, age doesn't change the fact that we deserve to be happy. And do you think you'd be happy away from me? I think I'd be very sad. But I'd rather be sad and honest than unhappy and pretending. It was an answer that showed a maturity Harold hadn't expected. Dorothy wasn't begging for forgiveness or making emotional blackmail. She was putting her cards on the table and letting him decide. I need more time, he finally said. How much time do you need? I don't know. Maybe months. Maybe years. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we live together as best we can, without pretending everything is fine, but without throwing it in each other's faces all the time. And the children? The children don't need to know, at least for now. All right? They got up from the bench and walked back home. At the door, Dorothy hesitated. Harold? What is it? Thank you for not yelling at me, for not throwing me out of the house, for not telling the children. I could still do all that. I know, but thank you for not having done it so far. That night, each slept in their own room, but with less weight on their hearts. For the first time since the discovery of the box, they had talked like mature adults, without desperate accusations or heated defensiveness. On Saturday morning, the children woke up early and ran to the backyard to play. Nathan found the artificial grass that was still leaning against the wall of the house. Grandpa, what is this weird grass? He asked. Harold felt his stomach turn. It's artificial grass, grandson. What's it for? It's for putting in places where normal grass doesn't grow. Like in the desert? Yes, like in the desert. Did our backyard turn into a desert because of the drought? The innocence of the question touched Harold deeply. A little bit, yes. But it will turn green again when it rains. When will it rain, Grandpa? Soon, grandson, soon. Nathan kept playing with the artificial grass, creating little scenes with his action figures. Harold watched him, thinking about how children can find fun even in the strangest situations. Dad, can I talk to you? Thomas approached. They walked to the workshop where they could speak privately. Dad, I noticed you and Mum have been acting a bit strange since yesterday. Strange how? I don't know. You barely look at each other, you barely talk. Did you have a fight? Harold hesitated. We didn't exactly fight, it's just, sometimes after being married for so long, people need some space. Space? Each person spending a little time in their own corner, you know, to think things over. Thomas didn't seem convinced. Dad, are you thinking about separating? The direct question caught Harold off guard. Why would you think that? Because you're acting exactly like me and Carol did when we were having marriage troubles. Too polite, too distant, forcing smiles in front of the kids. Harold realized he had underestimated his son's perception. Thomas, your marriage went through difficulties. It did, 2 years ago. Carol even left the house for 3 weeks. And I didn't know anything about it. We didn't want to worry you. You and Mom were always the example of a solid marriage for me and Rebecca. The irony of the situation was glaring. Thomas had hidden his marital problems to avoid worrying his parents, who were now hiding their own problems for the same reasons. "And how did you resolve it?" Harold asked. "With a lot of talking, patience, and professional help, and mostly by deciding that what we built together was worth more than any specific problem." Professional help. Couples therapy. It was essential. Sometimes you need an outsider to help sort out your feelings. Harold had never considered that possibility. In his generation, marriage problems were solved at home, between the couple. And did it work? It worked. Today, our marriage is stronger than ever. We learn to really talk, to express what we feel without fear. What were you afraid of? Of hurting Carol, of being judged, of being rejected. When you keep things bottled up, they grow and turn into monsters much bigger than they really are. These words resonated deeply with Harold. Were he and Dorothy also turning their situation into a bigger monster than it needed to be? "Dad, can I suggest something?" Thomas continued. "Go ahead. If you're going through some difficulty, seek help. Don't suffer alone, and most importantly, don't make important decisions in the heat of emotion." "What kind of decisions?" "Separation, divorce, anything permanent. Wait for the feelings to calm down before deciding anything." Harold hugged his son, feeling immense pride for the maturity he showed. "Thank you for the advice, son. Dad, can I ask you a personal question?" "You may." "Do you still love each other?" "Yes," Harold answered without hesitation. "Despite all the problems, yes." "Then it's worth fighting for." In the late afternoon, the whole family was gathered in the living room when the first clouds began to appear in the sky. They were dark, heavy clouds promising rain. "Look," Emily shouted, running to the window. "It's going to rain." Everyone stood up to look at the sky. Indeed, after months of drought, the first rain clouds were forming. "I hope it's a heavy rain," Carol said. "And a lasting one," Dorothy added. Within minutes, the first drops began to fall. The children ran to the backyard, wanting to feel the rain on their skin. The adults followed them, all moved by that moment of relief. "Grandpa, the grass will grow again," Nathan shouted, running barefoot through the wet earth. "It will, grandson. It will grow even more beautiful than before." Harold looked at Dorothy, who was standing on the porch watching the rain. There were tears in her eyes, but this time they were tears of relief, not pain. That night, after Thomas and the family had gone to sleep, Harold sought out Dorothy in the kitchen. "Thomas spoke to me today," he said. "About what?" "About us. He noticed something is wrong." "What did you tell him?" "That we were going through a difficult phase." "And him?" "He suggested we seek professional help, couples therapy." Dorothy seemed surprised by the suggestion. "And what do you think about that?" "I think it might be a good idea. Someone from the outside, impartial, could help us sort out this mess. Would you be willing to do that? For you, for me, for our family, I'd be willing to try anything. Even knowing it might be a painful process? Dorothy, anything will be less painful than continuing the way we are." They agreed to seek professional help as soon as Thomas and the family left. For now, they would try to maintain normality for the grandchildren's sake. On Sunday morning, the rain had stopped, but the backyard was lush and green. The earth had absorbed all the water, and small sprouts were already beginning to appear. "Look, Grandpa!" Emily ran to Harold with a small seedling in her hand. The little plant was born. It was a tiny sprout that had germinated overnight, fragile, delicate, but full of life. "It's a miracle!" Nathan exclaimed. "It's not a miracle, grandson," Harold said, kneeling beside the children. "It's nature. Sometimes seeds stay hidden in the earth for a long time, waiting for the right time to grow." "And how do they know when it's the right time?" Emily asked. "They feel when the water comes, the sun, the care they need to grow." "Like people?" Nathan asked with the typical innocence of children. "Yes, grandson, like people." Dorothy approached and heard the conversation. When the grandchildren ran off to play in another corner, she said, "That was a beautiful explanation." I was talking to the children, but I was also talking to myself, Harold admitted. Sometimes we need to wait for the right conditions for some things to grow. Like forgiveness? Like forgiveness, trust, renewed love. And do you think the conditions are right now? I think they're starting to be. That afternoon, Thomas and the family said goodbye to return to the city. The children were sad to leave their grandparents, but promised to return soon. "Take care," Thomas said, hugging his parents, "and remember what I said." "We remember," Harold replied. "And if anything happens, you can call. We'll come here right away." After they left, Harold and Dorothy were alone again. But this time, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was reflective. "Harold," Dorothy finally said, "I want you to know these were the 3 hardest days of my life. Pretending everything was fine in front of the grandchildren, knowing it might be the last time I'd see them as a grandmother married to you. Why do you think it would be the last time? Because I don't know if you'll be able to forgive me, and if you can't, I'll have to respect your decision. And if you can, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve this second chance. It's not about deserving, Dorothy. It's about choosing. Every day, choosing to stay together despite the problems. And do you think you can make that choice? I think I can learn, with help, with time, with patience. On Monday, they began looking for professionals who could help them. They found a psychologist specializing in couples therapy in the neighboring town. The first appointment was scheduled for the following Friday. "Are you nervous?" Dorothy asked the day before the appointment. "Terrified," Harold admitted. "And you?" "Me too, but also relieved. It'll be good to have someone to help us sort out this mess." "Are you going to tell her everything?" "Everything that's necessary, and you?" "Me too. No secrets. We've already had too many secrets in this family." On Friday, they traveled together to the first therapy session. The office was simple, cozy, with green plants and decor that conveyed calm. The psychologist, Dr. Susan, was a woman of about 50, with a maternal yet professional manner. "So," she said after the initial introductions, "what brings you here?" Harold and Dorothy exchanged glances. After a moment of hesitation, Dorothy began to speak. "Doctor, a week ago my husband discovered I had an extramarital affair 40 years ago." "I see. And how are you dealing with this discovery?" "Badly," Harold answered honestly. "Very badly." "What do you hope to achieve with therapy?" "I want to understand how to forgive," Harold said. "And she wants to understand how to truly ask for forgiveness." "And do you think it's possible to rebuild trust after a revelation like this?" "We don't know," Dorothy admitted. "But we want to try." Dr. Susan explained it would be a long, painful but possible process. She had treated other couples in similar situations, some successfully, others not. "The determining factor," she said, "isn't the severity of what happened, but the genuine willingness of both to work together on rebuilding." They left the first appointment with exercises to do at home. Write letters to each other, expressing feelings without accusations, set aside daily time for honest conversations, and most importantly, avoid making drastic decisions while in the process. In the following weeks, they began to establish a new routine. Every night after dinner, they would sit in the backyard to talk, not about the past, but about the present, about their fears, hopes, plans for the future. 1 month after the discovery of the box, Rebecca called to say she had important news to share and would visit them over the weekend. "Do you think she suspects anything?" Dorothy asked. "I don't know. But if she does, we'll have to tell her the truth." "The whole truth?" "Not all of it, but the part she needs to know." On Saturday, Rebecca arrived with a special sparkle in her eyes. During lunch, she finally shared the news. "Dad, Mom, I'm in a serious relationship, and he's asked for my hand in marriage." Harold and Dorothy were surprised but happy with the news. "That's wonderful, dear," Dorothy exclaimed. "Tell us everything." "His name is Daniel. He's an engineer. He's 42. We met at work 6 months ago and, well, it was love at first sight." "And when do you plan to marry?" Harold asked. "At the end of the year, and I wanted to ask you both something." Anything you want, dear. I'd like you to be my sponsors, both of you together." The request deeply touched the couple. Rebecca was asking them to represent union, lasting love, the example of a solid marriage. "Dear," Dorothy said, her voice choked up, "of course we accept. It will be an honor." That night, after Rebecca went to sleep, Harold and Dorothy talked about their daughter's request. "How can we be marriage sponsors when our own marriage is in crisis?" Dorothy asked. "Maybe that's exactly why she chose us," Harold answered. "She wants us to fight for what we have. Or maybe she doesn't know anything and is trusting in an illusion. Or maybe she knows everything and is giving us a chance to rebuild our credibility. How would she know? Women are more perceptive than men, Dorothy. Maybe she's noticed things over the years that I never did." On Sunday morning, Rebecca confirmed Harold's suspicions. "Mom, can I talk to you?" she asked as they prepared breakfast. "Of course, honey." "Mom, I always knew there was something strange between you and Godfather William." Dorothy nearly dropped the cup she was holding. "What do you mean by that?" "Mom, I was 10 when he died. I wasn't a little kid anymore. I noticed the way you looked at each other, the conversations you had when you thought no one was watching." "Rebecca, I never said anything because I thought it was just an unimportant little crush. But after he died, you were very strange for a few months. You cried in secret, you were distant. And what did you conclude? That you had some kind of affair and that you felt guilty about it?" Dorothy sat down heavily on the kitchen chair. "Why did you never say anything?" "Because I was a child and didn't know how to deal with it. And then because I saw that you got over it, that you chose Dad, that you continued to be happy together. And now? Now I think Dad found out. And you're going through a crisis that could destroy our family. How do you know? Mom, please, you're sleeping in separate rooms, you barely talk, you force smiles when we're around. I'm not an idiot." Dorothy began to cry silently. "What do you think we should do?" "Fight. You built a beautiful life together, raised 2 wonderful children, overcame so many difficulties. You can't let something from the past destroy all that. And if your father can't forgive me, then you'll have to accept it. But at least you'll know you tried." That same day, Rebecca had a similar conversation with her father. "Dad, I know Mom did something that hurt you deeply." "How do you know?" "Because I've known you both for 38 years, and because I always suspected there was something between her and Godfather William." Harold was surprised by his daughter's perception. "And what do you think about all this?" "I think people make mistakes. I think 40 years of solid marriage are worth more than 2 years of a mistake. And I think you're man enough to forgive the woman you love. And if I can't, then you'll have to live with the consequences. But Dad, think about it. Do you want to spend the last years of your life alone, bitter, or do you want to spend them beside the woman who truly loves you?" "How do you know she truly loves me?" "Because if she didn't, she would have left with Godfather William. She chose to stay, Dad. She chose you. She chose our family." These conversations were fundamental for Harold and Dorothy to understand that their children, even without knowing all the details, supported the rebuilding of the marriage. In the second therapy session, Dr. Susan helped them understand that the forgiveness process is not a single event, but a path you walk every day. Forgiveness, she explained, doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It means choosing not to let the pain of the past destroy the possibilities of the future. They began to work on practical exercises to rebuild trust, small daily gestures, honest conversations, total transparency in all actions. 3 months after the discovery of the box, Harold woke up one morning and realized he had slept through the entire night without waking up thinking about Dorothy's affair. It was the first time that had happened. "Dorothy," he said during breakfast, "I think I'm starting to heal." "How do you know?" "Because last night I looked at you and saw my wife, not the woman who betrayed me." "And today? What do you see today?" "Today I see both. And I'm learning to accept that you are both at the same time." "And does that scare you?" "A little, but it also relieves me, because it means you're human, like me." At the end of the year when Rebecca got married, Harold and Dorothy were closer than ever. Not because they had forgotten the past, but because they had learned to integrate it into their story in a mature way. During the ceremony, when the priest asked if anyone opposed the union, Harold looked at Dorothy and whispered, "I oppose anything that tries to separate people who truly love each other. Even when they make mistakes," she whispered back. "Especially when they make mistakes. That's when love is most needed." 2 years later, Nathan and Emily were on vacation with their grandparents when they found, while playing in the backyard, a small metal box buried near the mango tree. "Grandpa!" Nathan shouted. "There's a treasure buried here!" Harold and Dorothy ran to see what it was. Inside the box were love letters they had written to each other during their courtship, wedding photos, and a small ring that had belonged to Dorothy when she was young. "What a beautiful treasure!" Emily exclaimed. "It is, sweetie," Dorothy said, looking affectionately at Harold. "It's our real treasure." "Can I see the pictures?" Nathan asked. "You may," Harold replied, sitting on the ground next to his grandchildren. As the children flipped through the old photographs, asking questions about what life was like back then, Harold and Dorothy exchanged a knowing look. They had buried that box years before, but had forgotten about it. Unlike the first box, this one held memories they wanted to preserve, not hide. "Grandpa, why did you bury these things?" Emily asked. "To protect them from the rain and time," Dorothy explained. "Important things need to be protected." "Like love?" Nathan asked with the typical innocence of children. "Like love, grandson," Harold confirmed. "Love also needs to be protected, cared for, watered like a plant. And if we don't take care of it, it can die, or it can get sick and need treatment." "Have you ever been sick with love?" Emily asked. Harold and Dorothy looked at each other and smiled. "Yes, sweetie," Dorothy answered, "but we got better." "How? With medicine?" Nathan suggested. "No, grandson," Harold laughed. "With talking, patience, and forgiveness." "Is forgiveness medicine for sick love?" "It's the best medicine there is." That night, after the grandchildren went to sleep, Harold and Dorothy sat on the same bench where they had had so many difficult conversations. "Do you regret finding the first box?" Dorothy asked. "Sometimes," Harold answered honestly, "but most of the time, no." "Why?" "Because it made me know the real you, and I prefer to love the real person, with all the flaws, than to love a fantasy. And I learned that keeping secrets doesn't protect anyone," Dorothy said. "It only delays the pain." "And now?" "Now we live one day at a time, without secrets, without lies, without fear of being who we really are." They were silent for a while, watching the backyard where it had all begun. The grass had grown back, green and vigorous. Where the first box had been buried, there was now a small garden they tended together. "Harold," Dorothy finally said. "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a second chance, for fighting for us when it would have been easier to give up. You fought too, but you had to forgive, and forgiving is much harder than asking for forgiveness." "Perhaps, but it was worth it." "Why?" "Because I discovered that true love isn't the kind that never faces problems. It's the kind that faces problems and comes out stronger on the other side." 5 years after the discovery of the first box, Harold and Dorothy renewed their wedding vows in a simple ceremony in the very backyard, in the place where it had all begun. This time, not because the law or society demanded it, but because they chose to stay together every day. Their children and grandchildren were present, as were some neighbors and friends. The pastor who had counseled them during the crisis officiated the ceremony. "Do you wish to exchange vows?" the pastor asked. "I do," Harold said, holding Dorothy's hands. "Dorothy, 50 years ago I promised to love you in joy and in sorrow, in health and in sickness, in wealth and in poverty. Today I renew that promise, but with one difference. Today I know you are capable of making mistakes, that you are human, that you are real, and I love you even more for it." "Harold," Dorothy replied with tears in her eyes, 50 years ago I promised to be your companion for life. But I broke that promise when I chose to share my heart with another. Today I promise again, but this time knowing the value of what I am promising. I promise to be transparent, honest, and above all, I promise to choose you every day, not out of obligation, but out of love." When they kissed at the end of the ceremony, the grandchildren applauded enthusiastically. "Now are you going to be married forever?" Emily asked. "Only until you get older than us," Harold joked. "That's going to take a long time," Nathan protested. "It's true," Dorothy laughed. "It will take a long time. Now tell us what you thought of the story. Do you believe Harold made the right decision in forgiving Dorothy? What would you do in his place? Leave your opinion in the comments with sincere words, and don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories like this one. End of story.